Today we're talking about Fighting Steam, which is a game published by Chris Harding Simulations. It is a DTP game, comes in a Ziploc bag. It costs less than $20, including shipping from Australia, so pretty good deal. The topic is gunboat fighting during the American Civil War. It is a topic that hasn't been covered in many games. So yes, there is the old Ironclads. There is a game by GMT that is coming up, Rebel Raiders on the High Seas. I pre-ordered it. I hope you pre-ordered it too, so we can get that into production. We can play it, but in the meanwhile, we can play Fighting Steam, and today we'll take a look at that. Let's see what you find in a Ziploc bag. You have a cover sheet that has some designer notes in the back. Then you have 2 player aids, one for each player, with all the tables and stats that you need to know. 2 player aids. It seems common sense to me in a 2-player game, but there are so many games these days they only have 1 player aid, which literally makes it good to find 2 player aids here. You have the rule book, which is 12-page long. And it's very simple. Actually, only 6 pages and a paragraph are of actual rules. Everything else is scenarios, and the rules have illustrations, examples. It's a very clear book. Also, being so short, I don't think anybody will have any problem learning the game. You have 4 of these maps here that you can combine to create different types of scenarios, and you have the player logs. You have several sheets of player log to record all the things that you need to keep track of, but you can just make photocopies, or you can just use a regular piece of paper. And then you have the counters representing the boats that are involved in the conflict. As you can see, these counters only have the name of the boat on them. They don't have any other stats, because then you just refer to the player aid, and the player aid will tell you all that you need to know about each boat. Each boat has a speed factor. For example, Indianola has 6 and Little Rebel has 10, but at the beginning of each turn, the players can increase or decrease the movement factor of each boat up to 3 points. So, for example, Indianola can have anywhere between 3 and 9, and Little Rebel actually anywhere between 7 and 13. That means that you need to do some planning, because at the beginning of each turn you're committing to how much movement you're going to have for that turn, but is not complete commitment, because then you can still spend that movement in a variety of ways depending on what's happening each turn. But for the sake of example, suppose that this turn the players had decided not to modify the basic speed of the 2 boats. Now, a turn is divided in a number of impulses, and during each impulse, the boat that activates is the one with the highest remaining speed value. So, for example, right now, Little Rebel is the one that has most speed available, more than Indianola, so Little Rebel will activate. In each move, you can move by 1 square, and you have to move in the square that your boat is facing. So in this case, the Rebel will have to move in this other square here. The boats can be facing any of the 4 sides of the square or any of the 4 corners. So it's very important that the boats are placed always in a way that it's easy to identify their facing. Crossing an a square side costs 2 movement points, whereas crossing a corner costs 3 movement points. Also, once the boat has moved to the new square, the boat can change facing by 45 degrees. So the boat in this case could do like this, or it could do like this, or could just stay in that orientation. So in this case, suppose that the player decides to move in this square here, then decides to change orientation. Changing facing is for free. Anyways, the boat spent 2 movement factors, so now goes down to 8. Next impulse, remember, the one with the highest movement factor is the one that moves. Little Rebel still has the highest movement factor available, so Little Rebel activates again. Has to move in the direction of the facing, so has to go in this direction. Now can change facing again for free. Now it has spent 3 points because it moved through a corner. 5. Now it is Indianola that is the one with the highest movement factor remaining. Moves here. 4. And so on and so forth. So you have to do a little bit of bookkeeping, because you have to keep track of how many movement points each boat has at any time. But it is interesting because, as you can see, there are ways in which you can manipulate the turn. After a boat has moved, that boat can fire using its guns. The player aid will tell you how many guns each boat has and where they are located and how powerful they are. For example, Little Rebel has one gun placed in the forward position, a gun on each broadside, the left broadside and the right broadside, and no gun in the aft position. Or Sumter, for example, has a gun in the forward position, 2 guns on each broadside, the 2 per, and no guns in the aft position. Each gun is identified by 2 numbers, one number before the slash, which is the number to hit, and a number after the slash, which is the modifier based on range. What type of gun you use in an attack is determined based on these 2 illustrations. This one you use as reference when the attacking boat is facing a corner, so you will use left, right, forward or aft, depending on where the target is, and this other one will tell you which gun you use when your boat is facing a side. But as you can see, it's pretty simple, pretty intuitive. After you determine the guns that you will use in that attack, you must calculate the distance between the attacking boat and the target. The distance is calculated in the same way in which you calculate speed. That is, 2 points of distance per side and 3 points of distance per corner. In this case, if Hatteras is using the forward gun to fire against the Queen of the West, the distance here would be 2 and 4, because 2 are the sides that have been crossed. If the Queen of the West were here, then the distance would be 2, 4, 6, and 9 for crossing that corner. If the distance is less than the number after the slash, then there are no modifiers based on distance. If it is the same number or more, then you divide the distance by that number. In this case, it would be 9 divided by 8. It would be 1 point something something something. Then you drop the something something something. You only keep the number. You multiply the number by 10. In this case, it would be 1 by 10 is 10. And you subtract that from the number to hit. It seems laborious, but it just means in this case, if you have 8 or more, then you subtract 10. If you have 16 or more, then you subtract 20, and so on and so forth. Also, some targets may have an armor benefit, and you also subtract the armor benefit from the number to hit. Once you have the modified number to hit, you roll 2 dice. They must be of 2 different colors, one for the tens and one for the units. If the number that you rolled is the same or less than the number to hit, you deal a hit. Otherwise, you just missed. If the number that you rolled hits the target and it is doubles, then actually you also dealt a critical hit. It is important to keep track of the guns that you use, because during a turn you can use any of your guns only once. For each regular hit that you dealt, you roll on this table. If you roll a 1, then a random gun of the target is destroyed. If you roll a 2, then the target loses a point of speed. If you roll any number between 3 and 6, then the target loses 1 point of hull. Each boat has a certain allowance of hull points. When they go to 0, they sink. If you roll the critical hit, after you roll on this table, you also roll on this one. It is an extra hit. In some cases, you will simply deal a second point of damage. In other cases, you will deal a second point of damage, and the target also has to roll a die. On the roll of a 6, the target explodes. Steering, it means that the target loses control, and unless managed to recover in later turns, will only be able to move ahead or start circling aimlessly. Speed plus, the boat loses the usual point of speed, but also has to roll, and on a roll of 6, then the movement speed just drops down to 0, and that boat cannot move for the rest of the battle. Another type of damage that you can deal is by ramming a boat, which happens when one of your boats enters the same space as another boat, which may be one of the opponent's boats, but it can also be one of yours if you weren't careful when you were maneuvering. Because, important, each turn you have to move your ships. If they have enough movement points to move to another space, they have to do so. So it just, maybe you miscalculated and boom, you hit one of your boats. Either way, the procedure for ramming is the same. First, you look at the angle in which the ramming boat entered the same space as the target boat. In this case, it would be 90 degrees, 45 degrees. Then you look at the ramming table, you look at the angle of the impact, and each angle will give you 3 numbers. The first, you will look at if the ramming boat is faster than the boat that is being attacked. This other number if the 2 boats had the same speed, and this number here if the ramming boat is slower than the boat that is being attacked. You roll 1d6. If you roll that number or less, then the ram is successful. If the ram was successful, then you roll 2d6 to see the level of impact. Then you cross-reference the roll that you just had with the angle of the impact, and that gives you the number of hits that the ram inflicted. At that point, you go back to these 2 tables and you roll for each hit that you dealt. And if you rolled a double on the previous table, then actually some of those hits coming from the ram can also be critical hits. The game has several scenarios that are very different from one another. You have several engagements that are only involving 2 boats, 1 for each side. Very easy setup, 1 piece on the board for each player. And then you have more complex battles involving 7, 8 boats per side. The game overall is pretty good. I think it is fun, it is interesting. There is a little bit of bookkeeping because you have to keep track of how many movement points everybody's spending and what guns are firing each turn and the damage that you take. But if you get used to that when you're playing small engagements, then it's not too problematic when you're playing larger battles. It is very simple, extremely light and linear, yet at the same time it has a couple of clever things because you still need to know your boats well, where your guns are and what they can do to be able to exploit them in the best possible ways. The flow of the game is pretty interesting. The impulse system makes things interesting because you can manipulate the way in which boats moves, and sometimes, yes, you have to pre-plan at the beginning of a turn to make sure that one of your boats will move twice before the other one moves, otherwise they will meet in a certain space and they will ram each other, which is bad. Overall, I would say that for what it is, which is a very simple game that is very inexpensive, it is a pretty good game. I had a good time playing it.